So this is the second part of our brief exercise of dream interpretation, which aims to animate and illustrate certain Freudian concepts. So returning to the dream, I looked again at my notes just to see if there was some other aspect of the dream which I'd written down as soon as I had the dream that I neglected to mention when I had described it. And of course, we know in a general Freudian approach that it's useful to get the dreamer to tell the dream a second time and see what little bits have been neglected, which little bits have been forgotten, or which bits have been added. And interestingly, looking at my notes, I see one of the thoughts that was in the dream was that not just, oh wow, this is what American families talk about at meal times, but the sense that I feel a bit like a tourist. This is kind of interesting because we've already seen something of that idea indexed at the beginning of the dream. I know I'm in a different place, a place that's not familiar to me, a place that's not home. Some colleagues drop me off, I don't know them particularly well. So when discussing this with colleagues and students, one of the questions came up was, well, what about the repetitions in the dream, which seems significant? And we often have that sense, I think, when we start talking about a dream of being almost starting to drown in the number of signifiers or ideas or the content. But it does start to seem significant if something is repeated. So twice then we have the idea that I'm foreign. And maybe we even have a third element of that because I look into my wallet and I see South African currency despite somehow knowing that the dream is in the United States in some ways. So what do we do with that? And here's a further point of some significance. When my colleague students were asking me questions and asking me to free associate, there were some elements of the dream that I felt I wanted to talk about and others that I felt more reticent to talk about, that I started to feel a little bit anxious or cautious about. And I suppose one of the associations that came up, someone said to me, it's about being new to America. How long have you been in America? So I said, well, I've been in America since January 2015 and it's now 2022, so that's quite a long time. And then one of the students said, well, do you feel at home? And my response was, I endeavor to. And funnily enough, maybe a week before the dream, another person had said to me, how long have you been in America? And I said, well, 7 years. And they said, is it ever still strange for you? And I said, yes, all the time. And I think something of that thought had come into the dream. But the students pushed me further and said, well, what else about it? Why, your dream has a slightly menacing feel, okay? There's a menacing feel for this association or for the situation in the dream. And we've, in our introductory lectures, spoken about displacement, and we've spoken about displaced affect. So the Freudian question would be, what is the affect that's experienced in the dream? What else does it represent than the scene of the dream itself, if it is a displaced affect? And then one of the students in the class said, you told us yesterday in class about how exactly a year ago you were the subject of a Twitter attack. And you got involved in this whole controversial news story that got on to Fox News and so on and so forth. And you told us how terrible that was. And I said, gee whiz, I hadn't figured that was in the dream as such, but yes, indeed, that was part of the menacing, scared feeling I think I had in the dream. That could be one way of trying to understand it, even though it's now a year ago that it seems to have made a reappearance in the dream. And when that line of commentary started to come up, it felt very pertinent, and it felt to me that that was a correct interpretation of part of what the dream was expressing. And that idea seems to have been, whether partly conscious, partly unconscious, seems to have been, I am still a guest here. There's novelties. I am a tourist. But I'm always highly aware of what might have happened, what might happen if someone asks me to leave. And they pushed me more and they pushed me more. And I said, well, one of the things that was so frightening about the whole Twitter attack was I thought I'd lose my job. I thought I would be asked to leave. And that would mean, presumably, losing a foothold in the United States as well. And so the dream seems to express that in a number of ways. Both I'm in this family, I'm not well aware of who they are, and there's a sense that the family might be menacing. Indeed, that at some level, it was a pressurizing and frightening kind of experience. So that was a pretty fertile line of analysis and interpretation. But we can add something else to that, and that is this interesting idea, of course, that a dream has a greater memory capacity than a conscious series of thoughts. And something about the 5 Rand note harkening back to living in South Africa seems to have been significant. But we can go further still and ask, someone said, what about the father in the dream? You didn't say anything about the family members who were sitting around the table. And I said, well, the one thing I'm pretty sure about is I knew there was a family there, but there were no faces and I didn't see the other people. Now, we know again from Freud that the formal features of the dream are significant. And if you're not seeing, perhaps if you're not seeing faces, if the family remains underdescribed or not properly represented, but you do see the father, what could that mean? Which would be a great interpretive question to ask of anyone who had that dream. So I thought about that for a while, and I didn't get very far. And then someone says there's guilt in the dream. And I said, yeah. And then someone said, are you guilty? Has it got anything to do with COVID? And I said, oh golly, now that you mention it, I was in the UK a couple of months ago, and people around me seemed to be getting COVID, and I thought maybe they were getting it from me, although I never tested positive for COVID. But I'm not sure that's really what's going on. And then someone said, father. And I said, yeah. Oh, well, the other thing that happened in the summer was my father-in-law came to visit, and while he was visiting, all the way from South Africa, okay, another, I suppose, connection back to the currency, the 5 Rand note, my whole family, my 2 kids and my wife got sick, but not he and I. And what that meant then, for about 10 days, no, I exaggerate, 5 days, I was kind of, he and I were running the show, so to speak. And my family was very much in my thoughts, but I couldn't see them. They were upstairs, they were in their rooms, and the dream seemed to have somehow conveyed that, because there was a father in the garage event, and there was a family, but they weren't seen. Almost as if what the dream was conveying was my sense of being in an existence where there was a father, my father-in-law, he was my point of contact, that I had to be a good host, but that the rest of the family wasn't apparent. And the dream seems to almost signify that, with some faces or non-faces of people that were still there. Let's stop there, and then we'll conclude in the last of our talks.